how do you know that there's something different about his body? Well, because when he speaks to his disciples, they're able to see him. They recognize him as Jesus. They recognize that there's something different about him. But the belief of the disciples is so specific that they're willing, where before they ran from authorities, they are now willing to even walk into death's row. Christians are willing to die because they believe in the resurrection. Why do they believe in the resurrection of the dead? Because they have seen it. Just listen to what happens to the disciples. 50 days after they see this, after Jesus' resurrection, Peter is now preaching in the very temple where he could possibly be arrested and hung just like Jesus did. James, the brother of John, is beheaded for this message in Jerusalem by Herod in AD 44. Philip is scourged and crucified in Greece in 54 AD. Andrew, the disciple, is hung on an X-shaped cross in Greece and dies there. Matthew is pinned to the ground and beheaded in Ethiopia. Peter is crucified upside down in Rome. Thomas is executed in India. Bartholomew, who is also known as Nathaniel, is flayed in Armenia. Matthias, who is Judas Iscariot's replacement, is stoned and beheaded in Jerusalem. Judas, who is also known as Thaddeus, is crucified in Greece, and Simon is martyred in Persia. But it doesn't stop there. All of these men who are willing to die for Christ, we also see the Apostle Paul, right, who experiences the risen Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul, who was an enemy of the church, the Apostle Paul, who wanted to see the end of the Christian church come into play, has a complete transformation. One who is against Christianity now becomes a Christian. And Paul so much believes in the resurrection that he says this in 1 Corinthians 15, 12 to 19. Paul speaking says this, "If it is preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead?" He is speaking to the church in Corinth and says, how can you guys not believe in the resurrection of the dead if in fact Christ has been raised from the dead? And so he goes on, if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. So what he's saying is, look, if there is no resurrection, then Christ has not even been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, think about this for a minute, if there is no resurrection, then our preaching is useless, he says, and so is your faith. Why? Because if Christ is not raised from the dead, then there is no hope of resurrection for any of us. Right? There is no hope. We have no more. Our faith is useless, and we might as well not even preach. More than that, we are then to be found false witnesses of God. If we're preaching a resurrection of the dead and it's not true, we are false witnesses of God. But God has said, I am the God of the living. I am not the God of the dead. Right? So we say we believe in the resurrection because this is what God himself teaches. It says, for we have testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But he did not raise him if in fact the dead are not raised. For the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. If there is no resurrection, then Jesus is not the first one who is raised. And if Christ has not been raised, again, he says this, then your faith is futile, and here's an important part, you're still in your sin. Because here's what the resurrection shows to you. It shows to you that the sacrifice of Christ on the cross was enough to atone for your sin. This is how we know that the resurrection proves that your sin is forgiven, because God accepts the sacrifice of Jesus Christ because he raised him from the dead. The one who was sinless could not be held by sin. Why? Because the wages of sin is death. But Christ, who is perfect, is not held, is not seeing decay. Then those, he says in verse 18, those who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost forever. So anyone who has already fallen asleep then in Christ has been lost forever. There's no hope for us.